and wow, I'm ready.
Okay. Artem.
Yeah.
You're one of the people that have certainly been here through the rock scene from the beginning to where it is now. What major changes have you seen from when it first started and where it is today?
Oh, I think that the Soviet rock scene has passed through so many stages that, well, it's really a big story, and actually this all has started in the beginning of the 60s, and I think that the Beatles were the main inspiration for the Soviet rock. And through the 60s, all the Soviet bands, they were mostly playing the British and American songs and sang them in English, and they were like, well, copying the originals. And the Beatles were, and probably still are, the most popular Western band here in the USSR. And also, well, the Rolling Stones, the Cream, Jimi Hendrix were also very well known, and lots of bands used to play their songs. And in the very end of the 60s or in the early 70s, some bands like Time Machine in Moscow and St. Petersburg and Aquarium in Leningrad started to compose and arrange and to write their own songs in Russian songs with a message to the Soviet youth, songs that were quite original, I think. Maybe not musically, but I really think that they were very original in the contents, in the message. So all these bands in the 60s and in the 70s, they all have been amateur. They weren't professional, they didn't get any money for their job, and this is why they were nicknamed underground bands in the West. So some changes took place in the beginning of the 80s, when some of the bands like the Time Machine, Stas Namin, Autograph and others, they've been invited to this professional show business system. They were normal touring bands, they got money, they've played in large sports halls and so on. But unfortunately, this also led them to kind of a compromise, because their songs were sometimes polished to get approved by the official cultural people. So since then there were maybe two rock scenes in the Soviet Union. One, the professional rock scene, as represented by the Time Machine and Autograph and Stas Namin band and Cruise, Dialogue and other bands who are not necessarily bad and who are technically perfect, but I think they are slightly boring and maybe a bit, out of fashion maybe for now. And the second part of the scene were the amateur bands, the bands which played in the Leningrad Rock Club, which played in some Moscow small clubs and so on. So these amateur bands, they've created the most uncompromising sounds in the USSR, and they became more and more popular despite the fact that they were fully ignored by the mass media, by the record label, by the TV and so on. So now is the time for the truly major changes, because the whole cultural policy in the Soviet Union became more realistic, and now the bands which are really interesting, which really have some message, they get the recognition that they deserve. So this applies to Aquarium, this applies to Kino and Alice and Zvukimo in Moscow and so on. So all these bands, they now have regular concerts, and they are sometimes shown on TV, and say Aquarium, they'll get their first record soon released by the Melodia label, and I'm quite sure that other bands will also follow this path. So now this is a time of big rock music, well, not revival, but of a big rock music recognition in the Soviet Union. And I also think that this is the time when Soviet rock, this red wave, as Johanna Stingray says, this red wave is ready to break into the Western rock market. Because, well, we all here in the USSR, we know the Western bands very well. We listen to their records, we see their videos and so on. So we can judge these bands, and we can compare our bands to these bands. And I think that the best Soviet bands are really great, and they can really be rivals to the Western bands now.
What about Time Machine? Comes up a lot when people are talking about the history of Soviet rock. Everybody makes a statement that 10 years ago, when they were an unofficial band, they were the most famous band in the Soviet Union, but now today, or since they became official status or professional status, that something was lost, and that they're boring now, and a lot of people don't find them interesting. Why do you think that is? What was lost in that transition?
Okay. Well, the Time Machine, they are really a legendary band. And I think that they are the most influential rock band in the history of the Soviet rock, because they were the very first band to write the songs with Russian lyrics, and through the 70s they were really the #1 band. They were quite sharp, and they sounded not like the others. And you know, they were really showing the other bands the way of how can they deal with their own problems and write the songs that would concern the real problems of the life in the Soviet Union. And when in the 1980 Time Machine turned professional and started touring and make big gigs in the sports halls and so on, they became more polished, I think, because now they were aimed at the mass audience, which is not necessarily rock audience, and they were asked by the state concert organizations to play some songs and not to play some other songs and so on. So they became too safe, too comfortable. And although I still think that they are a good band, and Andrei Makarevich, their leader, is a very talented guy. He's a good poet, and he writes some good melodies, but they are now not the sharpest band, and I think that they have somehow stayed in the 70s, and in the 80s we've got another bands which play maybe the same role as Time Machine played 10 years ago.
Explain a little bit about you, who you are, how you started in rock and roll. Here you were a rock critic for a while, I think officially, or what your role is.
Okay, well, I'm a rock critic, and I am perhaps the only one professional rock critic in the Soviet Union, and I write articles and organize concerts and do this networking for the rock music for about 12 or more years. Now I'm a freelancer, and I work as a freelancer for 4 years now, and I collaborate with the press, with the TV and radio, but I regard this journalistic work as maybe the least important part of my activities. This is where my money comes from, but there are lots of other occupations where I spend my money, and I mostly do, well, I think this may be called it talent searching. I travel in this country, and I go to various rock festivals, rock concerts and so on, and I try to find new ambitious bands, wild bands, and I try to help them somehow, try to promote them in the official media, and try to organize some concerts for them and so on. So I think that this is my main job.
Most of what people have been talking about in terms of Russian rock history is the Leningrad rock scene and the Moscow rock scene. Now suddenly here and there we're slowly hearing about other parts of the Soviet Union. In fact, Kostya Kinchev has been talking a lot about some great bands in Novosibirsk and other parts of Siberia. You're another one that travels around, as you just said, and looks for new talent. Is rock and roll spreading all over the Soviet Union? What kind of bands are popping up in these other parts?
Okay, well, I would say that actually from the very beginning there were 3 centers of the rock music in the USSR. One is Moscow, the second is Leningrad, and the third is the Baltic Republics, especially Estonia and Latvia. The other areas like Siberia and Ural and Ukraine and Belarus, they've started to show some kind of activity only in the past few years. But now I really think that there are some good bands. In Siberia, say, there is an interesting band called Kalinov Most. They somehow...
That's the band who's talking about. Yeah, go ahead.
They somehow combine this a Russian folk style with psychedelic rock and hard rock, and the result is quite amazing. There are also some good bands in Sverdlovsk, like Nautilus and Orphan Juice. Then they've got some good bands in Ukraine, especially in Odessa, and also in Kiev. And the Baltic republics, they have a wholly different scene from what's happening in Russia. They sing in their native languages, and they have different cultural and musical tradition, and also a different way of life. So the bands from Estonia and Latvia, they sound totally unlike the Moscow and Leningrad bands, and I also think that there are some very good bands which are probably even better than the Moscow and Leningrad bands, although they are absolutely unknown in the West and also here in Russia. And these bands include like Antis from Lithuania, a Yellow Postman from Riga, Latvia, and Tourist and Contour from Estonia. So, in fact, rock music is spreading all over the USSR from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean, and I don't think that there are any areas in the Soviet Union where rock music is not happening. I mean, there are rock bands even in Central Asia, in Georgia, Armenia, and so on. And now, as there is bigger support for the rock bands, I really hope for these places, because I think that Moscow and Leningrad are maybe a bit overexposed, while other cities, they still are in shade. So I believe that there will be much more great bands from various obscure cities of the USSR in the very near future.
What are some of the bands from the West that have influenced you, or what are some of your favorite bands from the West now?
Oh, well, this is an easy question. Well, talking about the USA, I must admit that Captain Beefheart is my all-time favorite. I think he's the greatest thing rock music has ever produced, and, well, maybe my tastes are a bit bizarre, but I really think so. So, I think that the bands or the rock acts that influenced me strongly in the past were Jim Morrison and the Doors, Frank Zappa, Iggy Pop and the Stooges. Then, in the punk era, Alan Vega and the Suicide, Richard Hell and the Voidoids, and now I really like Lydia Lunch and Nick Cave and Sonic Youth, and also some more adult-oriented music, like, say, Tom Waits, who's very funny, I think. So, well.
And Russian bands, I mean, you've mentioned a lot, but if you just want to say again some of your favorite Soviet bands?
Well, my favorite Soviet bands. Well, this is my personal opinion, and maybe not everybody will share my tastes about Soviet bands, but say in Leningrad, my favorite bands are Kino, Televizor, and Jungle. I think these three bands are the most energetic and the most modern, maybe. So in Moscow we've got only two good bands, I think. Unquestionably the number one band is Zvuki Mu, and the second band, which is not very popular, but I really appreciate it because they're truly enigmatic, is Center. So these bands, and also the bands from the Baltic republics, which I've already mentioned, are my favorite bands in the Soviet Union. But of course this doesn't mean that I don't like Aquarium or that I don't like Alisa. They are very good bands too. Simply they are not exactly my cup of tea, maybe.
Okay, what do you think about Red Wave, the first Russian rock album being released in the West, and about Russian rock being the West in general?
Well, there's... I I think it's obvious. I think that the Red Wave album and the whole Red Wave concert is great, because with the professional bands, some of them may even undertake some tours in the West and so on. The bands like Autograph and Stas Namin and others. Well, it's okay, they are not bad and they play well, but I don't think that they could make it in the West. Simply because they are too boring. And the bands that are presented on the Red Wave compilation, this is really what is happening in the USSR in the 80s. Maybe if this album was made in 1987, there would be some other bands like Звуки Мор, Телевизор. But still, I think that this album is very good and it's fairly representative of what's happening now in Soviet rock. Not only Leningrad rock, but the Soviet rock as a whole. So, I think that there are maybe two big problems for the Soviet bands, two problems which don't let them to get very strongly exposed in the West right now.
Okay, so you're talking about two problems these bands face.
Okay, so I think that the Soviet bands now face two major problems, which don't let them to get widely exposed in the West. One is that they don't have a proper recording equipment, and I think that in terms of sound engineering and recording and production, unfortunately West is miles ahead of the Soviet Union. And I think that the Soviet bands, they should experience this work with the real producers, with these multi-channel systems, with instruments like emulators and synclaviers and so on, to get really strong, you know, and to be rivals with the Western bands. And the second problem is that they are not very experienced in live appearances. Say, all the bands from the rock club or from the Moscow Rock Laboratory, they usually play in the small halls, like like these clubs in the West. So they don't have all this huge equipment, these PAs, these laser beams and so on. So this is also why they are still a bit handicapped. But if we speak about the pure, if we speak about pure music and the songs and the lyrics and the playing and the performance, then our bands are okay, I think, and sometimes when I see, say, well, the video clips that Joanna made for Soviet rock bands, I really think that they are no worse than the Western ones. So if we get all these high technology devices, recording devices and stage devices, then I think that the Soviet bands really could rival the Western bands.
Great. So what do you think about the future? I mean, right now in the Soviet Union, rock seems to be becoming the official art of the day. And it's every time you turn the TV on New Year's, it's a rock program, and rock programs here and rock programs written up in the papers. It really is changing. What do you think is going to happen next in the rock world?
Well, I think that and now this is the time for the major change in the whole cultural and social policy in the Soviet Union. And I don't think that the rock thing will soon again be treated badly, and that all this rock movement again will start to get ignored. So rock is official now, rock is legal now, and I think that it will be okay from now on in the future. And well, I really think that the next step is maybe bigger collaboration with the mass media, because rock bands already have lots of concerts these days and lots of coverage in the press, but there are still quite a few of them on the TV, and also there are very few real rock records released by the state Melodia label. So this is the first step. This is the first thing that should be done really soon. And the next step is to promote the Soviet rock bands internationally. So I think that now they really deserve it. And say this new project invented by Jonas Stingray and Ken Schaffer, and the project which deals with inviting the Aquarium rock band to the USA and producing their full-length LP album in the USA with the contributions from big Western rock stars. This is really a very fascinating and amazing project, and I wish good luck to the people who are involved. And I also think that Aquarium is the band who deserved this great opportunity for all their long sufferings in the past. But also I think that this project may be a waste of time if it turns into a one-off job. If after the Aquarium the case is closed. I mean, I see it. I see the true meaning of this idea is a start of a continuing collaboration between the rock musicians from the East and from the West on a very high level, on a very commercial level too. It's not only a peace and friendship act, but this is also a serious, show business attempt. So I think that it must be done this way, and after Aquarium there must be other bands, other younger bands, and we've got lots of great new rock acts here in the Soviet Union who are maybe even more sensational than Aquarium, and who could probably make it better in the West than Aquarium. So after this first step there must be steps 2, 3, 4 and so on.
Great, I think that's great.